Hi everyone, and welcome to this chapter of Flutter Animations course. In this chapter, we're going to go ahead and duplicate a design that I've seen in, I think it is actually Dribble. I'll have to bring up my web browser. Yeah, it is actually Dribble. I can see it, but you can't see it. I'll bring it up to the screen soon. And this is one of the designs that I've seen, which is kind of for like a confirmation screen, which I think would be really good if you could duplicate and create as well in Flutter. So what I'll do, I'll just bring up my browser screen here, as you can see. So you could basically have a look at this animation. As I've mentioned in the previous chapters, what I usually do when I see an existing animation, I want to recreate that animation in Flutter or any other framework. I first look at the animation for like 10 minutes. I kind of like look at the different components of it and try to break it down in my head, what it is, how it is working, and what different components it has, kind of like the lengths of the animations and how they interact with each other. So one of the things that you can see in here is that we have, let's say, a container with rounded corners. We have a title and a subtitle, so those parts are very easy. We just need to make sure that this container has rounded corners. And then I can see in here a kind of a circle that fills this container and bounces out, or it doesn't actually bounce, it scales out and then goes to its normal size. So it's normal, let's say this is the normal size. So this is 100%, let's say in here, and then it explodes. So it kind of like, it starts from the exploded state, let's say. I mean, you could have a look at this actually from two different angles. You could say that it starts at 100% and then zooms out to, let's say 300%, and then zoom back in to 100%. Or you could say that maybe the animation actually starts when it has already filled this entire screen with the green or the red color, and then it goes to its 100% size. And this is what we're going to assume in this example, and that the start of the animation is this, not this, but this state, where the animation is already, or this container, the green or the red container, has already filled the white container. And then as the animation progresses, then this container gets smaller and smaller, and then it goes into 100% of its size, okay? So that's for the green or the red container. However, if you look at this container, we also have this check or the cross icon. And the thing with these icons is that they don't seem to be zooming in and out at the same rate as the surrounding container, because otherwise if this for instance check also was to be exploded by 300%, it would be so big that it wouldn't even fit onto the screen. So it seems like the green and the red containers have a different rate of zooming in and out than the icons. So, and in my head, when I see these things, I try to break it down into different components, as I mentioned before. So in my head, I need a different animation, or even maybe a different controller for the check or the cross icon in here. Doesn't matter, it's just an icon. It could be any icon. We could actually pass that icon as a component to this widget that we're going to create in here, okay? So let's just say we then need to have, there are two animating parts in here. One is this as outside kind of like green or red container, and then we also have an inside icon. So we will then decide whether this icon has to have its own controller or its own animation that is linked to the controller that controls the entire animation. Okay, so we'll make that decision later. So just so you know, this is not an animation that I've made up. As you can see, this is the person who created this animation is clearly mentioned in here. So I'm not gonna try to pronounce his name, but you could easily see it in here, and I'm also you can actually see the link up here as well. So just attribution to the original author of this animation. Okay, so let's get started. I'm gonna get rid of this in here. I'm actually gonna kind of like get rid of it on my screen as well, so I don't see it. So what I've done is I've prepared a project in here. You can see it's a simple Flutter scaffold application. And just like always, the source code for this application is going to be available in the GitHub repository, the link to which you can find in the descriptions of this video and all the videos in this series Flutter Animations course. So if you're curious about how I create this Flutter scaffold application, you can just have this as a code snippet like I do in Visual Studio Code. So I have my snippets already prepared. So if I go to snippets, I think configure user snippets, I have a Flutter code snippets in here, and I have, you can see a let's see, I have my log and I have FSA in here, which is Flutter Scaffold Application. I've named it. I mean, this is just a name I've come up with. It doesn't necessarily have to be called FSA. A lot of people in my videos actually wonder, where does FSA come from? And this is simply because I've set this up in Visual Studio Code. And also I have to say something. I usually don't say this in some other videos, but after having seen a lot of developers use Android Studio, I myself have been using Visual Studio Code for a long time, I can kind of now settle on the fact that it seems like Visual Studio Code is a little bit superior to Android Studio when it comes specifically to Flutter development, in that it has a lot of tools, it has a lot of configuration abilities, and I can see developers who are using Android Studio sometimes unfortunately make the mistakes that people using Visual Studio Code don't make, simply because errors and warnings are a little bit more visible in Visual Studio Code. So I'm just want to say that out loud, because if you're using Android Studio, it's a fantastic IDE, but if you're really into Flutter development, I personally suggest that you move to Visual Studio Code. And that's just simply an opinion that I have. So it doesn't necessarily have to be like that. But if you want to really get serious with Flutter development, I suggest personally using Visual Studio Code. So that's a little bit sidestep, and this is a Flutter scaffold application that I have, and I've already filled the main Dart file with Flutter scaffold application. Okay, so if I remove everything in here, I can just say FSA, and then I can just tap on it and I get my Flutter scaffold application. Okay, so here it is. I bring up the application the way it looks like right now. You can see we have a home page. Okay, and I've already also prepared the application the way it should look by the end of this video. So you can see we have the widget. It has already done its animation, so it's not animating constantly. So I haven't written it so that it animates constantly, but if I go ahead in Visual Studio Code on the screen, which you don't see, and press and basically do a hot reload, you can see the animation happening. There we go. So I've added a little bounce effect to it as well, as you can see in here. So the icon in the middle is big, and then it gets like shrunken down to 100%. And also this green container, which we can change the color to red as well. It does a little bit of a bounce and goes up, as you can see. So it starts kind of in the middle of the screen, and then it jumps a little bit higher to the top of the icon. So this is kind of how it works, how we need to ensure that the application that we're going to end up with looks like. Okay, so this is our reference. So I'm just going to keep the reference, and then we're going to have our application in this simulator. So the simulator that our application runs on is iPhone 14 Pro, and the simulator that the application has already been completed in is called iPhone 14 Pro Max. Okay, so it's just a Max version. I'm just going to get rid of that for now. Okay, so let's actually get started with the implementation. And what we're going to do is to have the home page as just a home page in here, and we could actually call it icons or something maybe. Let's say icons. Okay, so it says icons in here just like it does in the other simulator. You can see it says icons. Okay, and then what we're going to do is to create a separate widget for this guy. So actually, let me bring this guy up here. So we're going to call this guy, let's say, animated prompt, and it has 3 separate properties: title, subtitle, and child. All right, so the child is going to be this icon. So, but it could be any other widget. So it could be text, or it could be an icon, it could be whatever. Okay, so 3 properties: the title of type string, subtitle of type string, and then the child of type widget. So let's go ahead in here and we create a stateful widget because we have animation. So I'm going to say STF stateful widget, and let's call it animated prompt. All right, and in here then we're going to have 3 properties, as I said. So I usually go ahead and do this. I say title, subtitle, and then I say widget. Okay, sorry, child. And then what I do is I go in here, I say final string, and then I actually change this to a widget. There we go. So in here I'm going to get all my final fields. There we go. And then let's put a comma at the end of it, so we get them in the initializer or the constructor of our widgets. Okay. So what we're going to do is to have, what we're going to do is literally have one animation controller. And you've already, I've already mentioned all of these from before. I mean, in the previous videos, we've talked so much about animation controllers and animations. So I'm not gonna say that a lot more in this video. I kind of assume that if you've landed on this video that you've already watched the previous videos in this series. So if you haven't done that, please go ahead and watch the previous videos, because I build on top of the previous videos. Every video is built kind of on top of the previous video, on the knowledge at least of the previous video. Okay, so if you haven't watched the previous ones, please go ahead and do that now. I know it's a little bit of a pain in the neck, but it is necessary because I cannot possibly and humanly explain every concept in every video. It will just be very boring for me and very boring for the people who actually invested time in watching the previous videos. Okay, so what we're going to do is going to have one animation controller for this entire animation, but we're going to have 3 animations. Okay, one animation is going to be taking care of the scaling of this icon. So I'm going to replay this animation. Have a look at it. Do you see this icon first starts really big? Do you see it starts really big and then it zooms into its 100% size? Let's say this is its 100% size, and the way it starts is kind of like maybe 300%, maybe, or 400%. We're gonna land on that soon, so don't worry about that. So that's one animation. Okay, so an animation object that it has a double value, which is the scaling of this icon. All right, then we have this container itself, which is the green container at the moment, but it can be any container. I mean, it can be any color. And then we have an animation for that as well, because it scales as well, right? So the scaling happens like let's say this is 100% size, but it starts at maybe 300%. Because it's so big, it's like filling this entire white container, okay? So that is one animation. And then as you can also see, there's another animation that is the Y placement. If this is the X axis in here, like it starts from top left and goes to the top right. And then the Y axis is from top left and it goes to bottom left. So this is the Y axis, right? If you notice this, in the beginning of this animation where it is exploded, then this green container and its icon are in the center of the screen. 1, 2, 3. There we go. Did you see that? So it starts at the center of the screen, but as the animation progresses, this green container and its child, which is this widget, go up a little bit, and also it bounces a little bit, right? So that's going to be an animation of an offset object. Okay, so 3 animations: the scaling of this icon, the scaling of this container, and then the Y displacement, or the disposition. Or disposition, yeah, displacement, disposition. I don't actually know which one is the right word. I call it disposition, but maybe it's actually called displacement. So we're gonna, yeah, actually, I think it's called displacement. Yeah, let's call it displacement. So it's just moving of this green container with a little bit of a bounce effect. Look, here is the bounce effect, right? There we go. So let's keep that in mind. So we have a controller, one controller, and all the animations are hooked into that. So let's go into our state object and start creating these things. So we say, since we have 3 animations, we cannot use, actually, wait a minute, we have one controller. So we could use a single ticker provider mixin. So let's say with single ticker provider, state mixin. And I've already explained this also in the previous videos. If you don't know what this does and are wondering why I'm not explaining it, please watch the previous videos. Okay, so let's go ahead and create our controller. So I'm going to say late animation controller, and then we have 3 animations. Okay, so this is, let's call it icon scale animation, like this. And scaling is a double value, because it's basically scaling is a simple double value. Okay, it's not an offset or anything, or it's not a size, it's a double. Okay, and then we say we also have the container scale animation. So I'm going to copy this and I'm going to put it here. I'm going to say container scale animation. And then we also have the Y displacement animation. So let's say Y displacement animation. All right, and again, for someone who English is their mother language or mother tongue, you may disagree that with the naming of this verbal. It may be disposition. To be honest with you, I don't know if it's displacement or disposition, but you kind of get the idea. We could also call it Y animation, to be honest with you. Y animation. All right, that's fine as well. So now we have these things in here, but we need to go ahead and create the controller. So let's go ahead and say that we override init state. All right, we call super first. This comment is a little bit, it's a little bit misleading in that it says that you have to do your work before calling super, but we need to actually do it after calling super. So let's go ahead. So here we say animation controller, and we say that its duration is seconds 1. All right, like this. Let me close the parentheses as well. All right, and that's really good. Now let's go ahead and create this Y placement animation first. So I'm going to bring up the animation one more time. You see in here. Okay, so we start with an offset which is in the center of the screen. So we're going to actually center this green container in the middle of the screen when we render it in the beginning. So our starting point is offset of 0 and 0. But as the animation continues, we're going to move this container up a little bit, meaning that we're going to actually go minus. So if this is 0, 0 in the center, by changing the Y position, which is this axis here, to a minus value, we're going to move this up. Okay, remember, so our reference is in the center, 0, 0, and the second 0 is the Y. And if you move the Y to minus, then it goes up. And if you move it to plus, then it goes down. All right, it's kind of as if we're saying that this is 0, 0, and then moving Y to a plus value then moves an object down, and moving it to minus moves it up. All right, so it all depends on where your reference is. And our reference for this container, the way we're going to lay it out soon, is that the reference is going to be in the center. So X and Y are pretty much going to be here in the center. Okay, so let's just say that we start with that animation. So I'm going to say Y animation is equal to, and we're going to create a tween. And also make sure that this is not an animation of double, it's actually an animation of offset. All right, so we're going to say we have a tween of offset, and remember, tween simply means between. Okay, so we say we start with 0, 0, and then we're actually going to move this to 0, 23. And this is a value that I've basically made up in here because it looks good in this particular example. But if you're creating another container, maybe with different sizes, then this value needs to be updated. Okay, so it's a magic value, you could definitely say, but it's magic within, I mean, it's not so magic within this context. All right, but it could look magic just looking at it. All right. And then in here we have, and you can see we're animating a curved animation. And in here, we're going to say ease in and out. So ease in, out, like this. All right. So you could see that easing, it happens like this. I mean, it's difficult to see it because it's also doing a little bit of bounce, but easing in and out, it kind of like, I actually have to draw that for you. So let me bring up my iPad screen. So I'm going to do it like this. So I know that the Flutter team has created animation sample, like references for explaining how animations actually happen. But if you think this is like a little bit of a chart we have in here, animation easing in and out kind of looks like this, like this. So if this is the out part, out, and this is the in part, the easing is happening like this. So it's kind of like starts very slow and then goes up to its maximum speed or velocity, then it goes down. So that's the out part. Easing in only has this part, and easing out only has this part, but easing in and out has both parts, if that makes any sense. Okay, so that's kind of like our animation curve, and that's why we're chaining this animation with a curve animation, you can see. Okay, so we're animating our parent controller with this curve like this. And that's our Y animation, basically. I think we're ready with that part. So let's go and create the icon scale animation. And let me see if I can bring up the simulator again. And the icon scale animation is here. So what we're going to do, we're going to say it is scaled from the value of 7, and then we're going to scale it down to the value of 6, because if we actually do 100% scaling, which is the scale of 1, this icon is going to be super small. Okay, so we're going to look at it again from very big to quite big. And this quite big is kind of like our end value. And the way I've noticed works best in this particular animation is that the end value should be the scale of 6, meaning that we've exploded this icon 6 times as big as it should be. And the starting point, which is here, which is really big, is a start point of, it's basically exploded to 7 times as big as it should. So let me actually bring up the iPad screen. I'll explain this a little bit here in a new document perhaps. So boom, okay. So let's say that this is our container, okay. And if we have this circle in here at the end of the animation, and this is our title and this is our subtitle, if we place that icon in the center of the circle at 100%, it will just be like this. It will be a really, really, really small icon by default. And that's how Flutter basically lays it out. But what we need to do is to ensure that in its settled state is actually quite big. It should be kind of like this. And this is 6 times as big. And a lot of people actually have complained, or not complained, but they've noticed that I write my X's like this. And this is something that I've learned at school, like to write my X's like this. I don't know why, X and Y. I write it like this, but a lot of people say X like this. But for me, X's are written like this. But anyway, so when I say 6 times here, so you see the X, that simply means times. So 6 times as big is the normal state, but then when the animation is kind of like in the middle, so the circle is so big, it's kind of like taking this entire container, then this tick icon is like this big. And I've noticed that it works really well if we just say that this is 7x scaled basically, okay? So I hope that makes sense. So let me get rid of my Apple Pencil in here and go back to our animation. So let's create that animation. So we're going to say icon scale animation is, let's see if GitHub Copilot can start actually adding the basic values in here for us. So it's a tween of double, and we're going to say we start with 7, but we land on 6. All right. And also it's a curved animation, and we're going to ease in and out that one as well. Okay. Then also we have the container scale animation, which is basically this container. Let me just bring up the simulator. It is this green container. Okay, so boom. So we're going to start with a very big container, which is twice as big as it should be. Okay, and then we're going to scale it down to 0.4. So this is like 0.4 of the size of its normal size basically. Okay, so it's 40% of the normal size of this container where it is landing. So let me go ahead and say container scale animation, and it is a tween of double, and we're going to say it starts at twice its size and it ends at 0.4. Okay, and again, please remember, I've experimented with these numbers a lot, and I landed on these numbers after like hours of experimenting. So these are truly magic numbers, and they work only in this context. Okay, just remember that. So I'm not like a genius that I was like, oh my God, if you're sitting at home thinking, well, how did he come up with these numbers? Well, I just sat down and experimented, and I found these numbers to be working the best with this particular animation, having the Drupal animation as my reference. So I'm no God, I'm just experimenting with values and finding the ones that work best. Okay, so for the curve of this guy, we need to ensure that it does a little bit of a bounce. So it does a bounce out. Okay, so if you look at this animation, I'll bring it up. You can see it does a little bit of a bouncing. And bounce out, the way it works, I mean, you can see in here, it is a curve animation and it does a bounce out. So the way bounce out works is that if I bring up my iPad screen and create a new document again here, so let's say this is our chart of the animation. So bounce out kind of looks like this. It does ding, 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 ding. So this is the bouncing. If this is the animation value that goes like this, okay, so it's kind of, it starts with, let's say it starts at 0 in here and it goes to 1. It kind of does a bounce between it. Okay, so nothing magical. And we don't have to have a bounce in. I mean, there is a bounce in and out, bounce in out, but we don't want the in bouncing, meaning that we don't want the bouncing in the beginning of the animation. We want the bouncing in the end of the animation. So when I read in and out, I always think of beginning and end. Okay, so bounce towards the end of the animation. All right, the cool thing is that we're done with the animation. So we've actually set up the foundation. What we need to do is that we have one controller in here. So let's go ahead and dispose of it when our state object is disposed of. So we say dispose, and we put, actually we have to dispose of our stuff before super dispose. So I'm just going to say controller dispose. Okay, so the cool thing is that we're done with those. What we need to do is to actually lay out these components on the screen. So create the container icon and the little container around the icon, the title and the subtitle. All right, so those parts are just plain Flutter, so nothing magical in those things. Okay, So in here, we also start off the animation. So we say controller, like this, and we say reset it first, and then we say go forward like this. Okay, so every time we rebuild the state object, then the controller is going to reset and go forward. So the animation is going to start. So every time you do a hot reload, your animation starts again. Okay. So let's go ahead in here and create a little bit of a container. So this container is going to be this white container first. So I'm going to say return container. Okay. And in this container, we're going to have a shadow. So I'm not going to write the shadow parts, to be honest with you. I think it's a little bit boring. So because this container, you can't see it, but it has a little bit of a shadow. It's just that we can't see it because the background is so dark, but it has its own shadow. So I'm going to place the let's say actually this needs to have a decoration. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to bring up the entire decoration here because it is quite boring to write all of that. You can see it has a decoration. The container itself is white. It has a border radius of 20, which is this guy in here, right? You see it has border radius, and it has a box shadow, all right, which is black with 0.2 opacity. Good. So that part is set up. Now we've also created this guy in here. You can see it is called, what was it called? Animated prompt. So let's go in our homepage and actually create an instance of it so we can actually start seeing that on the screen. So I'm going to bring that as well. For the app bar, we have the title, and I'm going to place the body in here. You can see it's just a center, and it has an animated prompt. The title says, "Thank you for your order." And the subtitle says, "Your order will be delivered in 2 days. Enjoy." And the icon is, the child, it could be any widget, but we've actually used a built-in icon, which says icons check. All right. So that part is done. Let me just save this and go back to our app. You can see at the moment, our container is taking this entire screen. Okay, it's white, it's taking the entire screen. What's really good about it is that it has the border radius. That's the only thing we got right. But that's okay. What we can do is to go ahead and add some constraints to that container. Okay. So let's say that we have the container, and what we're going to do is to say we put it in a actually, I wonder if we have to do the clipping right now or maybe a little bit later. But what we could do it later. Let's go to the container in here right after the decoration. We're going to add a child to it, child. And for this child, we're going to create an inner stack. So these components, all, as you remember from the previous videos, all our animations are kind of going to be based on stacks. So the container, remember, it sizes itself based on its child, and at the moment it has no child. So what we need to do, if we create a constrained box in here and give that constraint box some proper sizes, that it like takes maybe 80% of the width of the screen and like maybe, I don't know, yeah, at most 80% of the height of the screen as well, then this container is going to size itself according to the child. So let's say the child is a constrained box. And for the constraints, let's see, constraints like this. I'm going to say it's box constraints like this. Okay. And let's give it max width. We're going to say 100. And then actually let's give it min width. So at least it takes this amount of space, not less than this, okay? And its max height is gonna be a, let's say, media query of the context, and we're gonna be size height multiply 0.8 so it's at most gonna take 80% of the height of the screen. And also for the width, max width, like this, 80% of the width of the screen. So be careful a little bit here. Okay, so if you're copy pasting the height, make sure that you change the height here to width as well. Okay, so we have that. Let's put some commas in here to get the formatting right. Let's see if that made any changes in here. There we go. So this is our min receipt, because this child, which is the constraint box, itself has no children. So what it's doing is it's adhering to its constraints. So it's like, oh, I have no children. I cannot grow to this maximum size, but at least I know my rules. My rules are that I cannot shrink to less than 100. Okay, so that's what it's doing. It says, given that I have no children, then that's my size. Okay, but we're going to change that. So for the child, we're actually going to create this stack that contains all these components in here. Okay, so let's say child is a stack. All right, and stack has children, so we're going to add those children soon in here. There we go. So for the first child, let's see actually which one we should create. I wonder, the children, I mean, there's lots of them. Maybe we should first create the normal children in here, like the title and the subtitle, perhaps. Okay, so let's actually create these. Let's create the a little bit of a spacing in here. So the children of this stack, first let's create the spacing between this icon or the top of this to the component before it. So let's just say we have a size box in here, okay? And we say sized box, and it has a height of 160. All right, there we go. So that's the first child, and we could add a comment here. So that's the first child. Then we're going to add the title. All right, so I'm actually going to bring the title in here because typing that has really nothing to do with an animations course. So there we go. The text, it's not console. Do I need to remove that? There we go. And you see, here I had a warning. It says use const, and I just pressed Command S on Macintosh or Control S on Windows, and Visual Studio Code immediately added const for me in here. And the magic behind that is that I have, I think, settings, user settings here, and in Dart I have added a quick fix that's called source fix all. So if Visual Studio Code detects that there is something to be fixed here, not having a const specifier in here, then it adds it for me, so I don't have to do all of that by hand. So that may look magic to you, but it's really not. It's just a power of Visual Studio Code. And this is one of the reasons I think people need to start using Visual Studio Code more instead of Android Studio, because I've seen a lot of people using Android Studio that have no idea that these things even exist. So it's really good Visual Studio Code, I would say, for Flutter development. I mean, to be honest with you, in my honest opinion, I use Visual Studio Code for every development possible that I do. I use it for Django and Python. I use it for Rust. I use it even for iOS development. Like when I have an Xcode project open, I also have the same project open in Visual Studio Code, because a lot of times when I know exactly what I'm going to type, I go into Visual Studio Code and get help from Visual Studio Code and its GitHub Copilot integration, because Xcode unfortunately doesn't have that. Xcode is just like light years behind Visual Studio Code in essence. So anyways, that was a little bit of a side track, but just want to say that it is really good for Flutter development. So and we have that. So that's the title. You can see in here it says thank you for your order, and we have to have a little bit of a size box in here, okay, and then the subtitles. So I'm just gonna copy paste those things. Again, these have nothing to do with an animations course, so that's why I copy paste them. There we go, and it says thank you for your order, and then I can see that the subtitle unfortunately is a little bit off. It's kind of like gone off the track in here, but that could be because we don't have proper sizing set up, maybe, I would say. Like if this in here instead says text hello, how would that appear? I can see it's on top, and this could simply be, to be honest with you, the reason for this is that we've actually added these things into the stack. However, these components first need to go into their own column, okay? Because in a stack, they're all laid out on top of each other. So this is a little bit of a problem. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these components that at the moment are in the children of the stack, select them like this, and then I'm going to say wrap with a column. So put them in a column first, okay? So then it looks like this, all right? So let's go into this column then and say that it has, it needs to shrink to the minimum size that it needs at the moment, because you see column is taking the entire height of the screen. That's its default behavior. But we need to change that. So let's say widget.subtitle, change that, okay. And then we go into this column's properties, and I believe it had a main axis alignment. So we say the main axis alignment is in the center, and then we say main axis size is minimum. All right, so it shrinks to the least amount of space that it needs, okay? And you can see that it doesn't look so good at the moment here. There's more padding around. So let's actually add some padding. to this column. So I'm going to grab the column and go ahead and say rapid with padding. Okay, let's see if it looks better. And the padding at the moment is 8, so let's change that to 32. There we go. It looks a little bit better, right? So in the outer component, which is a constraint box, inside it we have the stack, which has children. The first child is a column which is wrapped inside a padding. All right, I think actually, is there a padding property here as well? No, there isn't, unfortunately. Padding, so column doesn't have padding. Okay, good to know. All right, so I would say that's the first part. So that's the first child of the stack. However, we need to also ensure that we are adding this container in here. And that's the part that we're gonna just type everything by hand. Okay, so column in here, and then the padding in here. Sorry, the first child of the stack is not actually the column, it's a column inside a padding. So the first child is actually a padding. Okay, so let's go in here, and what we're gonna do is to start off by creating the parent component for this entire thing. So what we need to do in here is to create a positioned fill. So we need to be able to fill this entire outer component with a component. And this component that needs to fill this entire widget is going to be called positioned.fill. All right. Okay. As you can see, it's complaining. It says, okay, but I don't have any children. That's fine. We're going to fix that. So the first child is going to be a slide transition. All right, so this is its own widget, and it takes I believe it takes an animation object. Okay, and what it does is that it basically takes care of the movement of this container up. So you see it goes up. This is this widget. Okay, it's taking care of that. So we say a slide transition, and you remember the animation that we created, which moves up, is, let's say, is the Y animation, I believe we called it. All right, so this guy is complaining, saying I don't have an animation. You see, I don't have a position, so we're going to say position. Your position is the Y animation, I believe we called it. Undefined name. Okay, Y animation, like this. Then this guy also it has to have its own child, and that child is going to be our scale transition. Okay, so we go in here and we say child is a scale transition. I'm going to actually type it by hand. I'm not going to take this GitHub Copilot suggestions because I think it becomes a little bit hairy. So scale transition, which is basically the scaling of our container first. Okay, so we say its scale is I think we call it container scale animation. There we go. Then for the child of this one, we have to create a container which basically has it has the color, and then it has that little tick icon. So we say the child of this is a container like this, and the container has a decoration. So we say it has a const of box decoration. Okay, and this is just to get that shape in place. So we say the shape is a box shape of circle, and its color for now is green. And remember, you can actually take this color as a parameter to your widget. So up here, blah 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 here. So you could just say maybe the container color or something like that, so you don't have to hard code it in your prompt. You could do that, but for now I'm just going to leave it green. Okay, but for like a homework, you could actually add that to our components. So that's our decoration, and let's go to the child in here, and then we're going to say the child is actually another scale transition, which is the scaling of this icon. Remember this widget. Okay, so we say is a scale transition like this, and the scale parameter is actually the icon scale animation, and its child then is the widget child. As simple as that. So now magic is going to happen. So this is how our app looked like before. So I'm going to change the size of the screen a little bit, bring the app here. I'm just going to press Command S. There we go. Okay, there's a little bit work left, and we're going to take care of that soon. Okay, the animation seems to be happening really well. That's exactly what we want. But there's a bit of a difference. If you look at how this should work, I'm going to press Command S on this animation on the left-hand side, so you see how it should work. There we go. You see this circle is actually being clipped within the container. So it's not leaking outside the boundaries of this outer container. So like this, you see, when the animation starts, the entire container seems to be green, but the circle isn't leaking outside the boundaries of this container. However, in our animation, the circle is kind of leaking outside, right? You see the circle is like going outside the boundaries. So what we need to do is to remedy that, we simply need to place this entire thing inside a clip R rect. So let's go in here and we go and we say this container is within a widget. We say we wrap it with widget. We say clip R rect. And then we say in here the border radius is circular, and make sure it has the same border radius as this container. Okay, so if this is 30, this needs to be 30. This just ensures that no component inside the child of this component itself leaks outside this border. Okay, so command this. There we go. Now we have our animation. Okay, that's it really. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to place a little bit of a comment on top of this file before committing it into the GitHub repository, just so we have a little bit of attribution to the original author of this animation on Dribbble. Okay, so you have that link as well. So that's it really for this animation. And please, if this helped you in any way, please press the thanks button at the bottom of the screen, or if you want to subscribe to my channel, please go ahead and do that. All these things just to support me a little bit would really be appreciated. These are the things that really keep me going at the end of the day to produce free content here on YouTube. So thank you so much everyone for watching this video. If there's any questions, just put them in the comments of this video, and see you in the next one.